This argument was the final straw, the one that broke John's patience. No, he and his wife Mary had argued before. Sometimes they wouldn't speak for days, sleeping in separate rooms. But in the end, they always found a way to reconcile, mostly for the sake of their children, who needed their attention. But now the children had grown up and started families of their own. Their daughter Anne was already 25, with a family of her own. When her parents invited her to join them on a beach vacation, she answered, "Dad, Mom, come on. I'm a grown woman now. I've got my own family. We're going to the beach too, but to Mexico." Their son Chris, after hearing the same suggestion, said, "You know I live with my girlfriend, right? How could I leave her behind?" "Bring her along," his parents suggested. "No, Mom, Dad, I'll go to the beach with her, but without you. There are good deals for Mexico right now, Anne told me. That's where we're going." So, John and Mary ended up at a seaside resort in Florida. They checked into a spacious two-room suite with an ocean view. The bedroom had 2 twin beds. The living room had a fold-out sofa. There were mirrors, nightstands, a coffee table, a vanity, and all the usual conveniences. Mary immediately chose which bed she'd sleep on and told her husband to take the other one. After settling in, they went to the restaurant. The food there was excellent. Full and satisfied, they returned to their room. In such heat, neither of them felt like walking outside. At the restaurant, Mary had been making eyes at other men, and John quietly called her out on it. But no, the real fight didn't start then. It happened later, in the room, when John, fresh out of the shower, suggested they lie down together on the bed. And that's when Mary snapped. She unleashed a torrent of insults at him, grabbed the room key, and stormed out. John didn't have enough time to stop her. He was left alone, shocked, frustrated, unable to understand what had triggered such a furious reaction. Yes, they'd fought before, but today her words had cut especially deep. He sat down on the edge of the bed, trying to make sense of what had just happened. His thoughts kept circling. What did I do wrong? Why does she always find a reason to fight? Maybe she's just tired of my attention.
After a while, John decided he couldn't just sit and do nothing. He left the room, hoping to find Mary. It was already getting dark outside, and the lively buzz of the resort was beginning to fade. Hearing music, he followed the sound and suddenly caught the familiar tone of Mary's laughter. Coming closer to the dance floor, he saw her dancing, pressed close against a young man. John pulled out his phone and took a few pictures. When the dance ended, the man and his buddy, with Mary between them, headed to a nearby bar. Unable to stand it any longer, John approached their table. "Mary, what's going on here?" he asked. "Nothing," she replied. "These are my friends. I just met them tonight. And besides, I'm on vacation. I can do whatever I want. Or don't you realize that every glass of wine will be on your tab?" The man turned to John. "And who are you, anyway?" "I was her husband until today, but it looks like I'm not anymore." "Fine. Enjoy your evening. I'm leaving." John went back to the hotel room, feeling more helpless than ever. Passing the front desk, he asked when the next train was headed in his direction. Back in the room, he packed his things, and within an hour, he was already at the station. Meanwhile, Mary had been shaken by John's bitter words about her disgraceful behavior and about having to pay her new acquaintances. She managed to slip away from the awkward situation and wandered down to the boardwalk. She felt hurt and lonely. She knew she had overreacted, but she couldn't hold back her emotions. It seemed to her that John just didn't understand her, didn't value her feelings. She thought about how their life had changed. The kids had grown, they had their own lives now, and she and John were left together, 2 people who suddenly felt like strangers. Mary sat down on a bench by the ocean, watching the waves. She wanted to cry, but no tears came. She felt their relationship had hit a dead end, and she had no idea how to get out of it. The biggest mistake of all had been entertaining those men. She knew John had been hurt, and seeing her in the company of others had only made him furious. Later, when she returned to the room, she didn't turn on the lights. She undressed, lay down in her bed, but couldn't fall asleep. Her thoughts circled. What should I tell him in the morning? How do I even start a conversation? When Mary woke up in the morning, she noticed John wasn't in the bedroom. His bed was untouched. She thought maybe he'd spent the night on the couch in the other room. She decided to go to him, admit she had been wrong, invite him back to the bedroom, and try to fix things. But in the living room, there was no John. Checking the closet, she discovered his clothes were gone too.
After thinking it over, Mary went down to the hotel restaurant for breakfast. She sat at a table but couldn't eat a thing. Her mind was occupied with just one question. Where did John go, and what do I do now? Inside, she was twisted up with anxiety and regret. She wished she could turn time back, apologize, explain that her behavior had been foolish and impulsive. But it was too late. John was gone, and she didn't even know how to reach him. At that moment, one of the guys she'd been sitting with in the bar last night joined her at the table. "So, how'd your husband take it? I guess not too well since he's not here at breakfast." "I don't know what his reaction is," Mary muttered. "We haven't spoken since." "You should have stayed with us last night," the man smirked. She shook her head. "He said that as of today, he's my ex-husband. That's what he told me." "Well, then I suggest after breakfast you come by my place. We could hang out." "Thanks for the invite, but I'm not interested." Mary still hoped John would show up at the restaurant, but no miracle happened. She picked up her phone to call him and froze. What would I even say? How do I explain my behavior? She knew her words last night had been harsh and unfair, and her flirting with strangers an unforgivable mistake. She felt guilty, but also wounded. Why didn't John even try to understand me? Why did he just leave without giving me a chance to explain? So she decided to call her daughter, Anne. Anne had always been the wise one, the one who could give advice. When Anne picked up, Mary barely held back tears. "Honey, your dad and I had a fight. He left, and I don't know what to do. But really, it's his fault." "Mom, calm down," Anne said softly. "Tell me everything, step by step." So Mary explained the fight, her behavior, how John had caught her with strangers, and how he'd left without saying goodbye. Anne listened silently, then asked, "Mom, in what way is Dad at fault?" "He doesn't listen to me. He could have at least given me a chance to explain." "Do you really want to fix things, Mom? Or are you just upset that he walked out?" Mary froze. It was a serious question. She realized her resentment and irritation toward John had been building for a long time. But now that he was gone, she understood how much she missed him. Quietly, she said, "I want to fix it. Maybe forgive him too if he apologizes to me." "Mom, you need to be honest with him," Anne replied. "Call him, apologize, and say you want to talk things through. If you both really want to save your marriage, you'll find a way." "No, I'm not calling him," Mary said firmly. "And since the hotel is already paid for, I'll stay here until the end of vacation." "Mom, don't you realize you're risking losing Dad?" "Where's he going to go?" Mary answered stubbornly. She hung up, feeling even more confused. Her daughter's advice had been reasonable, but pride and hurt kept her from making the first move.
On the third day of her lonely vacation, Mary was sitting on a bench along the boardwalk when the same young man she danced with that night walked up to her. He smiled and asked, "So, decided to stay alone? Or are you still hoping your husband will come back?" Mary looked at him coldly. "That's none of your business." "Well, if you get bored, I'm always ready to keep you company. That's what I came here for. I don't charge much." "What do you mean, you don't charge much?" I mean, I came here to entertain rich women. This is my season. Soon I'll have a waiting list." "So you're a gigolo?" Mary asked. "Yeah, some call us that. But they don't realize we're very skilled in love." "I don't see much demand for you," she shot back. "Trust me, there is. My buddy doesn't even leave his hotel room. Women won't let him out, not even to grab a bite. And honestly, we had plans for you too. But your husband, rude guy that he is, ruined everything." Mary felt her stomach turn with disgust. She jumped up and said sharply, "Leave me alone! I don't need your company." She hurried away, her hands trembling. At that moment, she realized what a terrible mistake she had made, even allowing herself the slightest attention from these kinds of men. Back in her hotel room, she sat on the bed and at last allowed herself to cry.
When Mary finally decided to leave the resort, she packed her things and ordered a taxi to the train station. On the way, her heart was heavy with the thought of how quickly everything had changed. Just a few days earlier, she had believed she and John could still save their marriage. Now she felt it might be lost forever. When Mary returned home, she discovered John was gone, and so were his belongings. She sank down on the couch, covering her face with her hands. The pain of loneliness pressed down on her. Deep inside, she knew she had brought this on herself, but she didn't know how to undo it. Meanwhile, John had already moved to a bigger city, where an old friend helped him get a well-paid job. He cut off all ties with Mary, speaking only occasionally with the kids. Sometimes he met up with Chris, who after graduating college was also living in that city, renting an apartment. By unspoken rule, during those meetings, they never mentioned Mary. For John, the past held no good memories anymore, only bitterness. Sometimes he thought the only bright moments were raising the kids together, but now that the kids had grown and started their own lives, even that seemed to fade. Eventually, John filed for divorce. The process wasn't as quick as he had expected. His lawyer warned it could drag on, especially if Mary tried to fight over property. But John had no interest in delaying. He was ready to give up almost everything just to close this chapter of his life as soon as possible. He didn't even attempt to contact Mary about the details. For him, it was already over. Mary was shocked when she received notice of the divorce filing. She had still been hoping that John would calm down and they could work things out. But now, with this decisive step, she realized she had lost him for good. She tried to call him, but he didn't answer. She didn't know he'd changed his number and that all the contact information in the legal paperwork belonged to his attorney. The only connection left between them was through their children. Anne and Chris, seeing how much both parents were hurting, tried to help, but their efforts were in vain. John was unyielding, while Mary, even though she regretted everything, couldn't overcome her pride and admit she was the one who had destroyed their marriage. Before the first court hearing, Anne went to see her father in the city. They talked for a long time, and she tried to convince him to give Mary another chance. "Dad, you know Mom never meant to lose you. She just got lost in herself. She's different now. She's realized her mistakes." "Anne," John replied, "I can't just forget everything that happened. I don't want to go back to what only brought me pain. Your mom and I became strangers long before that fight. Maybe this is better for both of us." Anne understood it would be hard to change his mind, but she also knew she had to try with her mother.
Anne then turned to her mother, urging her to take the first step. Mary listened and finally agreed. She wrote John a long letter in which she admitted her mistakes, apologized, and begged for a chance to start fresh. She sent it by email, but no reply ever came. Weeks passed. John didn't even think about answering. In his mind, the hurt and disrespect from Mary were too deep. Yes, she had been part of his life, but now he was afraid of returning to something that lately had brought him only pain. One evening, as John was coming home from work, he saw his son Chris waiting outside his building. They greeted each other, and Chris said, "Dad, Daisy and I filed for a marriage license. We've been putting it off for too long. This Sunday there's a meeting between our families, so you and Mom are both supposed to be there. I wanted to let you know."
John frowned. "Son, I can't let you down, but I'm not meeting with Mary. We'll connect over video instead." "You're serious? You really don't want to see Mom that much?" "Chris, I'm a man. I freed myself from what she called a marriage. In reality, I just escaped her control. She loved to boss me around, dictate everything. Looking back, I realize I didn't even have a say in our family. My resentments piled up, and one day the dam just broke. You can tell your mom I'm not a monk and I never took a vow of celibacy. I'm dating other women now, and the day she walked out of that hotel room to flirt with other men was the day I stopped feeling bound to her in any way." "So you won't come to the family meeting?" Chris asked quietly. "What's the point? The meeting is about the wedding, right? About expenses. Just send me the number of guests and the restaurant or venue. I'll cover my share. I'll also decide on a gift. And give me the contact info for Daisy's parents." Despite his hard stance toward Mary, John didn't want to fail his son. He understood the wedding was important and didn't want his personal conflict with Mary to overshadow it. So he agreed to join the meeting by video call, but firmly refused to see her in person. Chris was disappointed, but accepted his father's position. At John's request, he shared all the details: the guest list, the venue, and Daisy's parents' contacts. John, though busy with his new job, made an effort to get involved with the wedding plans. He even offered financial help to make sure the event was memorable and worthy. He wanted his son to remember that day as one of the happiest of his life. Meanwhile, Mary, learning that John wasn't going to attend the family meeting, felt even more alone. She realized her chances of reconciliation were slipping away day by day. Still, she refused to give up. Anne, seeing her mother suffering, suggested sending John a more personal message, an honest text. Mary agreed. She sat down and began writing, pouring out her feelings, regrets, and hopes. She admitted her mistakes, apologized for her behavior at the resort, and for all the times she'd been unfair to him. At the end, she wrote that she still loved him and was ready to work on their relationship if only he would give them a chance. The message was sent, but, again, no reply. Mary began losing hope, but Anne encouraged her not to quit. She suggested Mary travel to the city and try to meet John face to face. Mary hesitated for a long time, but finally agreed. She knew this might be her last chance.
On the day of Chris and Daisy's wedding, everything went according to plan. Even though John had skipped the family meeting, he still took an active part in the preparations. He even contacted Daisy's parents directly to discuss details and make sure everything was perfectly organized. He wanted his son and future daughter-in-law to feel surrounded by love and care. Anne, knowing her mother had decided to come to the city, asked Chris not to mention it to their father. She hoped the reunion between John and Mary would happen naturally, without added tension. Mary, arriving in town, stayed with Anne. She was nervous, but Anne reassured her that everything would be fine. When the wedding day came and guests had already gathered at the reception hall, Mary appeared at the entrance. She wore an elegant dress, but her face betrayed her anxiety. John froze for a moment when he saw her. He hadn't expected her to show up. Quickly collecting himself, he walked over and quietly asked, "Why did you come?" Looking straight into his eyes, Mary answered, "I came to ask for your forgiveness. I know I've made many mistakes, but I'm ready to make things right. I love you, John, and I don't want to lose you. Besides, this is our son's wedding too." "Maybe we'll talk after the wedding," John said calmly. "Today is Chris and Daisy's day. Let's not overshadow it." Mary nodded, understanding that even this was already a step forward. She took her seat and tried not to draw attention to herself. The wedding was beautiful. Guests were thrilled, and the newlyweds glowed with happiness. John, despite his inner turmoil, did his best to stay present, supporting his son and his bride. After the celebration, when most guests had gone home, John and Mary remained in the hall. They sat down at a separate table, and Mary began to speak again. She opened up about her feelings, about the loneliness she had felt, and how she now realized the weight of her mistakes. John listened without interrupting. When she finished, he sighed and said, "Mary, I know we can't fix everything. There's too much pain and too many wounds between us. I'm not ready. I've gotten used to being alone. It feels easier that way." Mary felt tears welling up in her eyes. She nodded and whispered, "John, I'm willing to wait. I'll do anything to win you back." John looked at her, weariness and doubt in his eyes. He was silent for a long moment, as if weighing each of her words. Finally, he said, "Mary, I don't know what to tell you. You're asking for a second chance, but I'm not sure there's anything left to repair. We lived together for many years, but lately I've felt like a stranger in my own home. You yourself said I don't understand you, don't value you. Maybe that's true. Maybe we've simply run our course." "John, I know my words and actions have hurt you," Mary pleaded, "but I'm ready to change. I'm ready to work on myself, on us. We didn't spend all those years together for nothing. We share memories, our children, our home. Doesn't that mean something?" John sighed and looked away. Outside the window, the city lights flickered in the night. Memories of their early years together, their children's births, the joys and struggles they had overcome flashed through his mind. But all of it felt distant, as if it belonged to another lifetime. Finally, he answered, "Mary, I just don't know. I don't want to make promises I might not be able to keep. I don't want us to end up stuck in the same dead end again. Besides, I'm seeing someone now, a woman who doesn't treat me the way you did for years. After the kids got older, it was like you decided your job in the family was finished." "So what? You're going to marry her?" Mary asked quietly. "No, it's not that simple either. I understand, but know this, I'm here, and I'll wait, as long as it takes." "Come on, I'll walk you to a cab," John said. They stepped out into the quiet, warm night. Mary walked beside him, her heart pounding. She wanted to say more, but the words stuck in her throat. At the car, John opened the door for her and said softly, "Take care of yourself." Mary said nothing. He stepped back, and she drove away, leaving him standing alone on the empty street.
The following weeks passed in tense anticipation. Mary went back home, but her thoughts kept circling around John. She tried to distract herself, take up hobbies, find new interests, but everything felt empty. Her life had lost its meaning without him. Meanwhile, John, left standing alone on that quiet street, wrestled with conflicting feelings. On one hand, he knew Mary was sincerely repentant and wanted to fix everything. On the other, he couldn't just forget the past. The hurt, the disappointment, the exhaustion from years of their marriage were too heavy. He didn't want to return to what had brought him so much pain. And yet, he also couldn't erase Mary completely from his life. She was still part of his past, the mother of his children. He went back to his new home and his new life. Work, fresh acquaintances, time with friends. These things distracted him, kept him from feeling emptiness, but sometimes, especially in the evenings, his thoughts drifted back to Mary, to their early years, their dreams, their plans for the future. Memories that now seemed so far away, as though they belonged to another man's life. Mary, meanwhile, was determined to find a way to win him back. She realized that apologies and promises weren't enough. She had to prove that she had truly changed, that she was willing to work on herself and their relationship. She started small, signing up for courses she'd long put off, reading books on relationships and psychology, trying to understand her own mistakes. She also spent more time with her children, especially with Anne, who supported her and gave her wise advice. Then came the second court hearing. John and Mary were officially divorced. For Mary, it was a devastating blow. When the judge announced the decision, she fainted right in the courtroom. It was essentially the bitter conclusion of that foolish argument in a hotel room. Anne tried to encourage her not to give up, but nothing could change the fact. The marriage was over. John didn't even attend the hearing. For him, the decision was simply a formality, an ending he had already accepted long ago.
Months went by. John continued building his new life and eventually found himself growing closer to another woman, Sarah. One evening, he said to her, "Sarah, have you ever thought maybe we should make our relationship official?" She smiled. "John, do we really need that? I'm happy as it is. Or are you after my apartment?" He chuckled. "Are you serious? Though, yes, technically it's yours." "Of course I'm joking," she said. "And besides, I don't have any close relatives. In my will, the apartment already goes to you. So, no, I can't tempt you with property. And you know what? I don't need anything from you either. I just love you. If you want to make it legal, I agree, but on one condition. No fuss, no big party." So, John and Sarah quietly signed the papers at the courthouse with only Chris and Daisy as witnesses. After the ceremony, they left for a small mountain cabin Sarah had inherited from her aunt. Looking out at the snowy peaks through the window, John felt, for the first time in a long time, a frozen block of resentment begin to melt inside. Sarah, wrapping her arm around his shoulders, whispered, "We'll build a new life here, without the past." He nodded, but somewhere, in the corner of his mind, Mary's image still flickered, like a shadow that couldn't be erased. Meanwhile, Mary, who accidentally learned about the wedding from something Anne said, shattered her favorite porcelain cup. The shards scattered across the floor, bright fragments of memories that could never be pieced back together. She swept them up methodically, as if drawing a line under her old life. The next day, she signed up as a volunteer at an animal shelter. Among wagging tails and grateful eyes, she heard her own laughter for the first time in a year. Months later, in spring, Mary traveled to the city to buy medicine for the shelter. Carrying boxes, she stopped in her tracks at a crosswalk. She had recognized John. His hair was graying at the temples. He was holding Sarah's hand tightly, while Sarah chatted animatedly, gesturing with her free hand. She couldn't help but notice the gentle glow in his eyes, the same look he'd once had when they first met in their college cafeteria. "Keep walking," she whispered to herself, but her steps slowed. Their eyes met for a split second, an ocean of unspoken feelings in his gaze. Sarah noticed the tension and turned around. For a moment, the three of them stood in silence, forming an invisible triangle in the middle of the noisy street. Finally, John broke it. "Hi." "Hi," Mary replied. "It's been a long time." And then they moved on, each their own way. Mary leaned against a lamppost, realizing her jealousy had suddenly been replaced by a strange sense of relief. In a cafe around the corner, she ordered a double espresso. Tracing shapes in the condensation on her cup, she caught herself thinking, for the first time in a year, remembering John didn't hurt.
The birth of twins to Anne became the event that brought John and Mary together again in the cramped hospital room. They stood on opposite sides of their daughter's bed, avoiding direct eye contact, yet both reaching toward the tiny bundles in her arms. Anne, exhausted but smiling, looked from one parent to the other and said softly, "Dad, Mom, meet Mark and Mila." John was the first to extend a finger toward the baby boy's hand, and the little fist reflexively squeezed it. Watching, Mary suddenly laughed. "Your grandpa used to love being in charge," she joked. "Looks like you take after him, John." The words hung in the air, reminding them of the years when such small jokes were part of everyday life. John grunted, but the corner of his mouth twitched. Sarah, standing in the doorway with a bouquet of peonies,
quietly set the flowers on the nightstand and slipped away under the pretense of finding a vase. A week later, when Anne returned home, Mary became a frequent visitor helping with the babies. John came by less often since he had to travel in from the city, but each of his visits developed a ritual. He would bring handmade wooden toys he had carved in the evenings. Anne teased him, watching him sand the edges of another rattle in her kitchen. "Dad, you're an engineer, not a carpenter." "Sarah says I need a hobby, so I don't turn into a grumpy old man." Then he added cautiously, "Would you mind if Sarah came along with me sometimes? You both picked me up from the hospital together, and Mom didn't object." A week later, John and Sarah arrived carrying a handmade mobile with ceramic stars. Mary, feeding Mila from a bottle, froze for a moment. The women exchanged polite nods without smiles. It was Mary who broke the silence, looking at the gift. "Beautiful work." "It's called a mobile. Well, maybe not the technical name, but yes. John did the carving, and I painted it." "John says you're a wonderful grandmother," Sarah added awkwardly. The clumsy compliment became their first fragile bridge. To Anne's surprise, by the end of the evening, the two women were chatting about the best brands of baby food, while John, watching from the kitchen, caught himself thinking for the first time in years, maybe this is how it was meant to be?
That fall, when the leaves turned golden, Chris organized a family picnic in the park. Daisy, now expecting a baby, laughed at his clumsy attempts to light the grill, while Anne, rocking the stroller, told Sarah stories about the twins' mischief. By the lake, John and Mary found themselves side by side, tossing bread to the swans. Suddenly, Mary laughed, freely, without bitterness. "Remember when Chris was 5? He fell in here thinking swans were just giant ducks. And you jumped in after him in your brand new suit." A pause followed, filled only with the cries of gulls and rustling leaves. Then Mary whispered, "John, forgive me. Not for the resort, but for forgetting to see the person in you." "I forgave you long ago," John said quietly. "It's just a shame things turned out the way they did. We can't get the past back." They returned to the group, where Sarah was pouring tea from a thermos and Daisy was teaching Anne how to knit baby booties. In that mix of laughter, children's cries, and smoke from the barbecue, both John and Mary realized that the pain between them had grown quieter. That winter, Sarah was in town on errands when she was in a car accident. Mary rushed to the hospital with a bag of homemade pies and a thermos of broth. In the hallway, she told John, "She's your wife, John. Of course you can stay with her in the room overnight." "Actually, she doesn't let me," he smiled tiredly. "Says I snore too loud." Late one evening, Mary's phone rang. It was Anne. "The twins are finally asleep," she said. "Do you need help?" "Actually, tell Sarah that if she needs support during rehab, my friend is a physical therapist." Mary passed on the offer. John nodded silently. And for the first time in years, he realized that thinking of Mary no longer stirred anger or pain, only quiet gratitude, that, once upon a time, they had chosen each other and given the world Anne and Chris. Years later, at the twins' high school graduation, Mark was filming for social media. Mila suddenly pointed the camera at the family table and said, "Grandma Mary, Grandpa John, and Grandma Sarah, say something funny." "Better yet, let's sing," someone joked. John sang off-key, while Mary leaned toward Anne and whispered, "See? We're like pieces of a broken cup. Separate, but from the same set. And there's a beauty in that." When the photographer asked everyone to hug, their embrace wasn't awkward anymore, just hands that had learned both the weight of loss and the lightness of letting go, finding a new way to hold on.
Sometimes Mary still felt a pang of sadness when she looked at John, a flicker of envy toward Sarah. But she knew it was her own fault. She should never have treated him the way she did. She should never have started that fight in the hotel room. She couldn't even remember what had triggered her anger anymore, but she still felt ashamed of the way that John had found her in the bar, clinging to another man. The years flowed like a river, wearing down sharp edges and leaving only smooth stones of memory. Mary devoted herself completely to volunteering at the shelter, becoming indispensable there. Her days filled with caring for the animals, her evenings with knitting warm blankets for those shivering in cages. Sometimes, looking into the eyes of old dogs, she saw her own reflection, a soul scarred, but learning to live with its wounds. John and Sarah moved permanently to their mountain cabin, turning it into a cozy nest. Sarah discovered a talent for watercolor painting, capturing landscapes that John framed in the wooden mounts he crafted. Their life became a quiet waltz, steady, melodic.
One summer, at Sarah's invitation, Mary came to stay with them. "Thanks for inviting me. I won't stay long," she said. "Why the rush?" Sarah smiled. "Stay the whole summer. There's plenty of space. Come on, let's go to the store. Big delivery today." In the store, Mary recognized a man instantly, the same one who had tried to seduce her at the resort years ago. He was buying cheap wine and no longer looked glamorous. He recognized her, too, and asked, "So, patched things up with your husband, huh?" "What do you mean?" "You jinxed us that night." The next day, one woman's husband showed up with his buddies. No need for details, but let's just say we spent a month in the hospital. And now, we're useless as men. I work as a night guard at a farm supply warehouse. A month later, as Mary was preparing to go back home, Sarah surprised her. "Stay, we have a spare room. John frowns less when you're around." "I'm afraid the past isn't the best roommate," she replied. "No, Mary, we're more than friends now. We're family. To me and to John, you're like a sister." And that's where the story ends. If there's one lesson, it's this. Too often, we only realize the value of something once it's gone. What do you think?